Hey, today we're building a farmhouse table, and I'm going to give you lots of detail and tips along the way, so stick around. Hey, welcome back to the Woodworking Garage, where we never have enough space, but we make it work. Today is part 2 in our farmhouse style table build. If you missed part 1, I'm going to stick a link right up here in the corner, and you can go and check it out. Today's build is all about the table base. Okay, we're going to determine the placement of our table legs. And I'm going to put it on the edge of the breadboard end here. And we're going to place this table leg about 2 inches from the outside edge. Okay, so now that I've determined the placement of the table legs, I'm going to take a measurement so I know how long the skirt will be on the inside. And we're going to be at 58 inches. Okay, so now we know the 2 outside skirts need to be 58 inches, so we're going to cut down our 2x6s at the miter station. Next, we're going to find the length of our end skirt for the end of our table. 27 inches. Okay, with our skirt pieces cut, next step is to cut off the rounded edges and make this a 3.5 inch board. Hey, next step I'm going to be using the Kreg HD pocket hole system in order to put pocket holes in the end of our skirts. The Kreg HD is much bigger than your standard pocket hole screw. This is the HD, and this is the regular pocket hole screw. You can see the HD is much thicker, and it has a much bigger head. The HD is used for boards that are over 1.5 inches thick. The Kreg HD comes with its own jig that has a bigger diameter hole. Therefore, it also comes with a separate drill bit that is also larger. If you plan on using any of the Kreg pocket hole products, I really encourage you to get some of these clamps. These are the Kreg self-adjusting flat face clamps. They're perfect for clamping things down. Hey, if you have a Kreg pocket hole system, or if you plan to get one, it's much easier to drill your holes out if you have a variable speed drill and you put it on the fast setting. Okay, next step is to attach our skirts to our table legs. Because this table leg is so thick, I want to offset my skirt. I don't want it to sit flush to the edge. One, it's a little harder to get exactly flush. Number two, if you offset it a little bit, if anything gets a little off or a little wonky, it's not going to be as noticeable. Okay. Plus, I think it provides a nicer look when it's offset. To do that, I'm just going to use some 1.5 inch scrap to stick under both ends of my board to raise it up 1.5 inches. I'm going to use a clamp to clamp down our table leg. keep it from moving. Next, we're going to apply some glue to the end of our board. Now, we're going to line up our board so it's flush. And to help hold it in place, I'm going to use my kreg clamp. I'll go ahead and clamp it down. And drive in our first screw. Okay, we're ready to do the other side. Okay, we have one side done. Now we're going to attach the end table skirts. I need to have the same distance here as I do it on the other side, so I'm going to use a spacer block to kind of line it up with the outside of the table leg. So I know about where it's going to be. Yep. So this is where we're going to end up. I'm placing a clamp on the opposite side of this leg. When I start driving in the kreg screw, this table leg is going to want to slide, and this will prevent it from sliding sideways. We're again going to add some glue to the end of our board. Alright, so placing our spacer block here so it's flush with the outside. Pushing this board up where it needs to be. I'll place another clamp on to prevent this board from sliding around. Okay, so as you can see, this table is really starting to take shape. Our next step is going to be using a 1/2-inch pine dowel, and we're going to make plugs to go inside of our pocket hole. Plugs right here. Our pocket hole holes. And I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so we plugged the holes, and now it's time to give the base its first good sanding. We're going to sand it at 120 grit. Okay, to get this measurement, I'm going to put my tape all the way across, and I'm going to hook it on the outside edge. I'm going to see what this measurement is right here to the inside edge, which is 32.5. And I know that board is 1.5 inches, so I'm going to deduct the 1.5 inches width down there and make this one 31. Okay, I really like this Kreg track and stop system. It's great over here at the miter station. I can go and find my measurement, drop this stop down, lock it into place, and from there it allows me to get repeatable cuts at the same measurement. When you're getting ready to cut a board, make sure you always trim off the factory ends. This board is a scrap piece that's already been cut, so this is the piece I'm going to put against my stop, and then we'll have a fresh cut on the other end of our 31-inch board. Okay, this is a new board, and so this has got the factory edge on this side. I'm going to be cutting it at 31 inches, but I'll still have this factory edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift my stop, move it over about 1/2 inch or so, make my cut. Then I'm going to spin this part of the board around to go ahead and trim off this factory edge at 31 inches. Okay, I've milled down our cross supports and it's time to throw in some pocket holes. I'm currently using the Kreg K4 pocket hole system. I've been using it for about 2 years. I really enjoy it. It's a great product. Okay, we're going to lay out exactly where we want these cross supports to be. And this may seem a little odd, but it'll make sense to you in a few moments. Okay, so part of my build method, when I get ready to attach the tabletop to my base, I don't use typical hardware. I like to use dowels that you tap in, it secures the tabletop, and that way you can easily remove the tabletop later without having to undo a bunch of hardware and screws. It's a great method, and I'll show you that just a little bit later when we finish up this table build. So what I'm doing is I'm taking into account where I want these cross supports to be, because I need enough room on the end here to be able to tap in a dowel. And you'll see in a little while what that looks like. Okay, so before we install these cross supports, I need to cut in a 1-inch hole for the dowels that's going to secure the tabletop to the base. And in order to do that, I need to make sure that I have those in the right location. And I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so these cross supports are going to be attached to the table base, but on the bottom of the table, we're going to have us a little block that's secured to the bottom of the table that also has a hole drilled into it. And then what we'll do is we'll take a 1-inch dowel, we'll send it through the cross support and into the block, the cleat that is attached to the table. However, when we do this, we also want to consider the wood movement. And we've talked about wood movement before, where the humidity changes from season to season, and the wood absorbs humidity and it can expand, and it expands this direction. So when we get ready to attach our cleat to the tabletop, we have to consider how the wood is going to move during humidity changes and account for that with our dowel so that we don't end up ruining our tabletop. So when we attach our cleat to the table, it needs to be centered on one board. It doesn't need to be going across 2 boards. I want to have it on one board only. That's why it was necessary for us to flip the tabletop upside down, put the base here, so that we could kind of see exactly where we're going to end up placing our cleat, so we know exactly where we need to place the hole in these supports before we attach them. I always try to attach cleats as close to the outside of the table as possible and closer to the corner as possible, so that the tabletop gets pulled down onto the table base and everything's nice and tight. I don't want to be drilling holes in my outside skirt and have those dowels sticking out, showing from the outside. In this particular design, I want to hide those, so it's going to have to go into the cross support. And with the cross support here, I have to make sure there's enough room that we can tap the dowel in through the cross support into the cleat. So it's going to have to go right about there. So we're just going to find the center of our board. Does not have to be exact. Okay, so we know where the hole needs to be along the board here. We got it marked. Now we just want to make sure we put it in the center. So we're just going to measure that off and find our center. Also, when getting ready to drill these holes, I'd like to find the center, exactly where my drill bit needs to go. And I'll just punch a little hole in there. Gives a place for the bit to get started so it doesn't wander off. We go ahead and grab a block and test fit it to make sure that it's going to sit only on one board. So we got that fit in here nicely. There is going to be a little bit of a gap here. That's fine. And now we can stick a pencil in our hole and just go ahead and mark so we got an idea of where that hole needs to be so we can drill all the way through it. We'll see what that looks like. Okay, so over at the drill press, we went ahead and drill us a hole in our what's going to be our cleat. And now we're just going to go ahead and set it up here again and do a test fit. Stick our dowel through, and all right. So because these aren't exact measurements and we didn't not each of these cleat blocks are going to be exactly the same. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and label it so I know that this block fits best on this side right here. So I'm just going to put a little number 1 here and a little number 1 on my board, and maybe even an arrow so I know that this is the top and I know it fits there. And now I'm going to go and do it with the same thing on the other side. Hey, here's a tip for you. When you get ready to drill the holes in your cross support and set your drill press station up, when you set the fence on your drill press, in order to match where you're going to have your hole drilled in this, don't change any of those settings, because when it's time for you to go ahead and drill your cleats, you can take your cleat and put it right up against the fence of your drill press, and the measurements are already going to be done for you. So it makes it easier for you to just quickly go ahead and drop a hole. That way you know that the measurements from the edge of your board on your cleat and the measurements from the edge of your board on your cross support are going to be the same height, so everything's going to line up just fine. Always do a test fit though before you start to screw and glue everything down. Okay, so we test fit everything and we've got it marked. We know where everything's going to be laid out. It's time to go ahead and attach our cross supports. Now, because it's sitting on the table, I want to be careful not to get glue on the table, so we're going to go ahead and throw some paper underneath it. Then we'll go ahead and apply glue. If you do any kind of pocket hole joinery, this is a must tool to have. This is a kreg, what is it called? They're a fantastic way of being able to secure the wood. You just put this in one of the pocket holes and then you can clamp it down. Tap that down just a little bit because it's raised up. There we go. And then what we can do is go ahead and put a screw That was probably in your way. Go ahead and put a screw in the bottom one. That's our Kreg HD drill driver bit. I need to switch back over to the standard size. There we go. Okay, so as we installed our cross supports, the table base actually wiggled around a little bit. So we're not going to try to install our cleats just yet, because we need to go ahead and put the table base back into position. So before we do all that, we're going to pause on that, and we're going to move forward with going ahead and installing our corner braces into each corner. Okay, so what I do next is I go ahead and take my corner brace, and I'll slide it in here and get it into position where it's going to go. And then I go ahead and mark for where my screws are going to go, because we're going to use screws to attach the corner brace into this side skirt. Now, for most 2x materials, when you're working with pocket hole joinery, you're going to use the Kreg 2.5-inch pocket screws. But in this case, we're going to have to use a 2-inch screw. So I always keep some of these on hand. They're pretty handy to have for applications like this, where the 2.5-inch screw is just going to be too long. And so they work out quite well. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and set it up here and say, okay, so if we want our screw to be right about here, we don't want it to poke through on the side. So right about there would be good, as far as we want it to go in depth. I'm going to draw a line to the edge of the board, kind of like right in the middle of the screw. So I know this is where I need to go ahead and pre-drill a hole. And when I pre-drill that hole, it's only going to be this deep right here. So we can drop our screw into it, screw it down, and it's going to tighten everything up nicely right here. And what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up putting in 2 screws on each side. So there'll be one near the top and one near the bottom, right there. And I'll go ahead and line it up on this side too. Okay, I like using a Forstner bit for making these type of holes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mark this face of my board. We're going to carry that line all the way across like that, so I know about where to put my holes. And we're also going to find, let's see, right there's a good spot, and right about there is another good spot. So that's where we're going to put our holes. When we stand it up like this, we can kind of see now. Gotta reach around the camera, sorry. So when we stand the board up on our end, we can see now we need to go straight down to create that hole. Grabbing our Forstner bit, using the tip to put it right there where we want it. Drill a little hole to get it started. So it grabs the bit, and then we're going to go straight down. Now, how far down do we need to go? Oh, look at that. Right about to right there where that where the drill bit is offset. So that's about all we need to go. So that worked out. So we're going to go down right about there. There we go. See that hole? And then we'll do the same on this side. Alright, so back over here now, we can do a test fit again. Looking good. We're going to clean that up with a sander. Okay, so I cleaned up our holes with a sander, kind of sanded off our pencil marks. Now we're going to go ahead and slide some of this paper underneath here again, so we don't get glue on our table. Alright, so what I just noticed a few minutes ago off camera, I was testing out my clamp here, Harbor Freight clamp, to see how I could clamp this to get a good grip on it when I get ready to put those screws in. And the clamp doesn't really fit around the base of the table leg. Can't get it in there because it's just not wide enough, and it keeps slipping off right here. So what I did, I just quickly, over at the bandsaw, made this little jig that will clamp onto the side of the table leg right here, and it just gives me a place to grab hold of with my clamp on this side right here. So I can go ahead and now I'll be able to put a little pressure on that corner piece, and it's going to hold right here and not slip off. And I think that's going to work just fine. Sometimes you have to, when you don't have the tools you need, you just make what you need. Alright, so next we're going to go ahead and apply some glue. So now we're going to slide that into position. Go ahead and use our clamp, put a little clamping pressure on it. Alright. We got kind of lucky because we had just enough room in between here to get our drill. Otherwise this would have been in the way. However, I do have a fix for that, and here's another tip for you. If you are going to be working with pocket hole joinery a lot, you need to invest in this little guy right here. Okay? It goes on the end of your drill. Goes into your drill. And Kreg makes these 3-inch drill drivers that slides in there. So if we had not had enough room here, I still could have gotten in there like this. And I use this little guy a lot. So if you're doing pocket hole joinery, that's a must-have. Okay, we've completed the assembly of the table base, and we've also done the final sanding on the table base. We just did the last sanding on the tabletop bottom, removed a little bit of glue that dropped onto it, got everything cleaned up. We have everything aligned now exactly where it needs to be, so our next step is to finish our cleats and get those installed. And one thing I failed to do when we were making these cleats is this hole actually needs to be oblong. It needs to be a little bit wider to allow for the wood movement. So when these get attached inside the, or onto the table here, we want to be able to allow these to move just a little bit when the boards expand and contract with the table movement. We don't want our dowel going through this base support piece and then this piece, which is going to be attached to the table, and have everything nice and tight, because it won't be able to move, and when the boards expand, something's going to crack and break. So we got to go ahead and hollow out, or not hollow out, but we need to oblong, which means just simply make this hole a little bit longer this way, not this way, because we want it to be nice and tight still this way, but this way so that the dowel can move back and forth inside there. And so I'm going to jump over to the drill press real quick, go ahead, and I'm probably going to take maybe 1/8 of an inch on each side of this, drill that hole out a little bit bigger, and then I'll be back. Okay, and to show you what that looks like, it's just right there. We made the hole a little bit wider. However, the dowel is still going to be tight up and down, but it will allow it to slide back and forth just a little bit to allow for that wood movement. And that should do us just fine. Next step is we're going to go ahead and mark each block, and we're going to pre-drill some holes down about halfway and drop a screw down inside there. Then what we do is we glue the bottom, get it in place, and then go ahead and set our screw all the way down into the tabletop. Okay, so now we need to measure for our screw depth. I'm going to pre-drill the holes into the top of the block, the cleat, and it needs to come down And I want it to come down, so maybe at most an inch. So something like that, where it's going to go into the tabletop. I don't want it to go anywhere closer than that. And that's, yeah, see, that's right about an inch right there. So if I mark where the top of the screw will be, it's a pan head screw, we'll just mark it right there. So that's where the top of the screw will sit down. Now I know when I get ready to drill, I need to send my drill down to about that depth right there. And I'm going to mark my tape with this pencil. So now I'll drill down through to about that depth, and then we'll send the screw down and we'll be fine. All right. Next, before I go ahead and apply glue, I get a piece of cardboard. This is about maybe 1/8 of an inch thick, and I use that as a spacer, just so there's a little bit of gap between the cleat and the table here, and I'll do that on all four. That way, when you get ready to attach the tabletop to the base, you got just a little bit of wiggle room there in order to get it set into where it needs to be. That should do it. And this is a little tight. That's all right. If it's too tight, what we'll do is we'll just take it over the sander later. This is actually scrap, but when we get ready to make them, we'll go ahead and sand this down just a little bit so it's not quite so tight. We want it to be snug, but we don't want to have to hammer too hard to get it in. Okay, we're going to let that sit up. And then what I'm going to do is I like to come back with my sander, do a little touch-up sanding, and I'm going to go ahead and, with my sander, I'm just going to round over the edges of this block, or each block, just so it has a little bit of a rounded edge, just so when you get ready to put the table on the base, it has a way to kind of slip down onto the base a little easier. Okay, and as you can see, I went ahead and hit this with the sander and just gave us about a 45 chamfer or something like that, 45 degrees all the way around, and kind of hit these sides too, just soften it up so there's no sharp edges, and make it a little easier. Now to give it a more finished look, what we can do is we can go ahead and use a 3/8 inch dowel, because I drilled a 3/8 inch hole for those pocket screws. And what we're going to do now is just put a little glue on the end of this, stick it down inside that hole to finish it off, and use a flush trim saw to go ahead and trim it. And then I'll probably hit it a little bit with a sander and clean it up again, but that way our holes are plugged. Okay, using some scrap wood again, we're going to put another glob of glue right there. And then I'm just going to kind of roll my dowel into it a little bit, just so it's got a little coverage there. Just like that. All right, so the tabletop is complete, the base is complete, and we put the two together to get an idea of what it's looking like. What do you think? So our next step is we're going to go ahead and apply some pre-finish conditioner, and we need to let that sit for 45 minutes to an hour or so, soak in pretty good. And while we're waiting, we're going to complete our dowels so we can attach the tabletop to the base. Hey, let's take a closer look at this table. All right. As you can see, it's a little tricky working alone when you're trying to move large tables around. And this tabletop gets moved around 4 or 5 times during its build process. But I needed to get it back onto the bench so that we can stain it, pre-stain condition it, then stain it. And while that's drying, I can also work on this one. Here's a tip for you. A lot of people use tack cloths in order to wipe down their projects to try to get up all that fine dust. See, there's still some on my hand. We need to try to get all that off as much as possible before we start applying our conditioner and our stain. But what I have found is, if you go to the hardware store, or excuse me, if you go to the auto parts store, you can find this blue shop towel. It's very absorbent, and it picks up this dust very well. See that? So I like to use these. They're cheaper than tack cloths. I can get a package of them of like 6 or 8 for, I don't know, less than $10, I think. So it lasts me quite a while. And I can go through and wipe down my projects. Okay, to apply the pre-stain conditioner, I like to just use a sponge. Just get any cheap sponge. You can get it from the home center and wherever you do your grocery shopping. And hey, here's another tip. I like to do the bottom side of my tabletop first. That way, I get it pre-conditioned. I'll let it sit for a while. Then I go ahead and apply the stain on the bottom side. Then I'll flip it over. And I do the bottom side because, as you can tell, moving this tabletop back and forth, flipping it over by yourself, it's a little difficult, and I don't want things to get scratched up. So I do the bottom side first. That way, if something gets scratched up, it's on the bottom. And then I finish the top side, and then I can carefully move it over and transfer it back to the table base when we're all done. Here's another tip for you. I like using this Minwax pre-stain conditioner. Now when it comes to my stain, I do like Varathane, which comes from the Orange Home Center. But I do not like their pre-stain conditioner at all. It's got a really high VOC. It seems to take longer to dry. And the Minwax brand is it's just a lot easier to work with. Here's another tip for you if you're going to be doing much woodworking. I buy these in bulk from Costco. There's 200 to a box of these. It comes in a package of, I think, 2 boxes for $20. And they work well. So anytime I'm working with stains, paints, or finishes, I will throw on some gloves just to keep it off my hands. And because this does put out some VOCs, it's not as strong as the other brand, but it does get a little smelly. I'm going to go ahead now and throw on my respirator, get this tabletop ready to go. And one more thing I wanted to mention, and that is when I apply this, just saturate your wood pretty good. It's all right if it puddles up a little bit. What we're doing is we just want to get a good soaking on the wood here, and it's okay if it puddles up a little bit. There's no problem with that. We just want complete coverage. And I'm not sure if the camera is picking up, but I have little puddles here. I'll go back and wipe those down after I apply it, smear it around. That's all we're doing. Alright, so this is how it's going to work. I'm working in the blind here. You guys can see better than I can, but let's take our dowel, bring our hole, and if you have to hammer it in a little bit, hammer it in, but it doesn't need to be too tight, just like that. And then we're going to do this on all four corners, and then our tabletop will be nice and secure to our base. And when the table needs to be transported, just tap these out with a hammer, or if you can get them out with your fingers, great. Push them out, and then the tabletop lifts right up. Hey, that about does it for this project. I sure hope you've enjoyed it and that you've learned a few things along the way. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions about this build, please leave me a comment in the comments section below and I will get back to you. If this video has helped you at all, please help me by hitting the like button. For every time someone hits a like button, YouTube shows this video to someone else. And that's how this channel grows.